If you find yourself to be a resident of the Capitol or of the City Hall, as governor or mayor or as president, get off your knees and get to work.
Hello and welcome to The Secular Advocate. I'm Jayne, Senior Policy Counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the FFRF Action Fund. This week, we're talking about why it is so important to contact your representatives if you want to change your community and your country. We'll also take a look at some emails we've received expressing doubt that it actually works. Joining me from Oklahoma is our Regional Governmental Affairs Manager, Mickey Dollens. Hey, Mickey.
Hey, Ryan. How's everyone doing? Coming to you live from the always interesting state of Oklahoma, and I'm really excited to talk about citizen lobbying today. I know many people who are listening to this are wondering, does it even make a difference if I reach out to my elected official, or am I just screaming into the void? And as a current state legislator, I will tell you it definitely makes a difference, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get into it. I know we wanted to start by talking a little bit about your background, your experience with constituents, how that's been. Do you want to give anyone who doesn't know a little bit of a history about your very unique background?
Yeah, just real quick, I grew up in Oklahoma without any type of political background. There were a few significant life events that made me question what is the government doing to represent us, the people? And found out that it wasn't much in my current state and where I was living, and decided to take matters into my own hands. I ran in 2016 and flipped a red district blue, and I've been serving ever since. And I tell you what, you're going to hear some of the incredible stories that I've experienced over the past 10 years that will really reinforce the importance of citizen lobbying, which is different from activism. You know, we're going to get into a framework that will specifically lay out exactly how to effectively lobby your lawmakers. And I can't wait to empower our listeners with this strategy.
Awesome. And before we get into it, I wanted to note that The Secular Advocate is a production of the FFRF Action Fund, a 501c4 organization that develops and advocates for legislation, regulations, and government programs to preserve the constitutional principle of separation between religion and government. This is only our third episode of The Secular Advocate, and our YouTube page for the FFRF Action Fund is relatively new. So if you'd like to help support us, please share this video, and of course, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to reinforce that the Action Fund YouTube channel is also home to Theocracy Watch. It's a video series that's dedicated to exposing theocratic politicians and public figures. So everyone who's watching needs to be sure to check that out as well.
Okay, so back to today's show's topic. We're recording live, by the way, so we want to hear your thoughts and questions on the topic we discussed today. Please leave any questions you have in the chat below, and we will try our best to answer the questions live a little bit later in the show. So, Mickey, I want to start out right out the gate. You're a state representative in Oklahoma. Can you start by telling us what's been your firsthand experience hearing from constituents, generally speaking?
You know, Ryan, over the past 10 years, I've heard constituents reach out with issues, everything from a pothole in our local neighborhood to international wars. But in any case, it's always a joy and privilege to connect them to the right delegation, whether that's at the municipal level, the federal level, or right here at the state level. But one thing that's always really stood out when constituents reach out is a personal story, some way to personalize it. I remember when I first got elected in 2016, one of the very first letters I got was actually from a 9-year-old named Kaylee. And the previous weekend, Kaylee went to the county fair with her grandma and her mom and dad, and came back, and she wrote a letter to me and said, when I went to this county fair, they were using pets as prizes, and it really upset her. She felt that it was ethically wrong. And so to make a long story short, we put together some legislation. We had it go through the bill-making process. Unfortunately, her bill banning pets as prizes never got a committee hearing, but we were able to pivot, adapt, and we took that story to the local news, and it ended up airing, and the county elected officials at the local level saw her story and decided they wanted to chat. And so we had a meeting, And lo and behold, a couple months later, that particular county passed an ordinance banning pets as prizes. And of course, that was quite a while ago. So since then, other counties have jumped on. But that's a perfect example of how someone who wants to make change goes about it. It doesn't quite work out the way they wanted, but they're able to adapt, get a message out through a great story, and make change at the local level, which then can continue on from there. But the lessons that 9-year-old has learned carried on throughout her life, and she's still an involved member in her community. But we're going to break down that particular framework into a strategy that I recently developed, and I'm going to have the opportunity this summer to visit FFRF chapters around the country to deliver this presentation in person. So if you have a chapter or you're interested in starting one in your state, reach out to us and we can assist with that, and I'd be happy to come visit in person.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, so I have a few questions for you. First, we encourage our members to send a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls to their elected representatives. How many emails and phone calls would you say that you get each week?
You know what's interesting is if there's a bill that's really been on the news and it's been talked about a lot, we may at my office receive anywhere from 10 to 20 total emails. But in my social media inbox, I may have 200 to 300, which is really difficult because I run my own social media, as a lot of local legislators do, and we don't always get to read every one of those. Whereas when people reach out through the office, there's always a staffer, an assistant, who's going to have eyes on that email, and they're going to record the yes or no or the person's sentiment, and they're going to pass that on to the legislators. So I would say that's a big difference between activism and citizen lobbying, whereas lobbying is going through the official channels of talking to a staffer where that information is relayed to the legislator, and then also activism where you're getting tons and tons of messages in your inbox, which we'll get into how social media plays a role in citizen lobbying. But for the most part, it's so much that it becomes overwhelming, and staff will never have eyes on those. But for example, we've heard some pretty outrageous bills in Oklahoma that I know many of our people here listening are aware of. Typically, we'll get about 24 phone calls and about that many emails. And obviously, it does make a big difference. But the more people who reach out through the official channels, the bigger impact you're going to have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about specific examples of frustrations we've heard from some of our activists and their questions about which means is the most effective. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But the next question I wanted to ask is, have you ever gotten something from a constituent that changed your mind on how to vote for something? Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, and here's a true life story that just happened last week. The night before, I was studying bills for committee, and there was a bill that was a wind turbine bill, and I'm pro renewables and alternative energy sources. So I walked into this particular committee meeting with the plan to vote yes on this particular bill. However, about 2 hours before the meeting, I received actually a phone call at my office from one of my constituents who happens to be a tribal member, who explained to me that this particular bill was good for Indian territory, Indian country, because it required setback laws on the wind turbines, which would protect their aquifers. Now, this is a scenario that I had never considered before. And then shortly after that, I received an email from another tribal member who wasn't a constituent, but who expressed the same idea. And it changed the way that I voted on that bill. So one bill that I would have voted yes for, I ended up voting no, because I heard from not only a constituent, but from someone who would be personally impacted by the possible cause that this wind turbine in this particular location could have on their water aquifers.
Wow, and so that was a phone call that was, you said, 2 hours before the committee hearing. So I mean, this is like last minute. We sometimes send out action alerts right before, because sometimes we don't get notice about a hearing until the day before, which to us feels like absolutely last minute. So we're frantically trying to get people to email and call their representatives about this. So you're saying that even when you're already prepared, you know how you're planning on voting, and you get a last minute call in the office, that could potentially sway how you're going to approach that hearing.
Oh, definitely, yes. Perspective is everything. And as lawmakers, there's so much to learn, and we can't possibly be experts in every issue, especially the nuances. In this particular location, there was an aquifer that could be jeopardized. There's a setback law. And so in this case, it definitely made sense. But to your point, Ryan, about our FFRF AF action alerts, those go a long way, and especially at the state level. So oftentimes when we're talking about citizen lobbying, people are thinking about Washington, D.C., and obviously they represent a much larger constituency. But at the state level, whereas in Oklahoma, I represent approximately 40,000 people, you're able to get through a lot clearer than you may at the national level, and even more so at the municipal level. So taking that time to reach out to your lawmaker can definitely make a difference at the state and local level.
That makes sense. And I've heard that from state and local officials too, that compared to federal officials, they hear from a couple squeaky wheels. And if you're not one of those squeaky wheels, basically you are making a mistake. Now you mentioned a moment ago how emails are more effective than social media because social media is not going to get the eyes of your staffers, but emails will. And then you mentioned getting a phone call. How would you rank the different modes of communication? So like emails, calls, handwritten letters, what is the most effective?
It really depends on the situation you're in. If you're looking for urgency, like 2 hours before a committee meeting, definitely call. Put a personal story behind it. If you're a constituent, even better. If you're about a week out before a committee hearing and you want to leverage volume, go the email route. And if you're looking to spark grassroots change, social media definitely has a place. Maybe not the best way to DM your elected official, but to put a post out there that is telling a story, how people are going to be affected. It can really spread. It can go viral. And I'll have a story here in a second to talk about how one of our more well-known Christian nationalist legislators in Oklahoma killed his own bill because the public outrage was so loud.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. What about in-person visits? So something that some of us do when we work in government advocacy is we go and visit in lawmakers' actual office. Do you think is that worth a constituent's trouble, especially if they don't live in the capital city, to drive to the Capitol and meet with their reps?
I would say it definitely makes an impact. It's always best to be in person. However, we know that because of proximity, that can be really difficult for some people. But those who have an idea or a goal or a bill that they're either for or against, if that's a huge priority for you, I would say if you could make time to visit the Capitol, it definitely would make a difference. Just make sure you know the schedule because, for example, in Oklahoma, we're in legislative session Monday through Thursday, and then people from all parts of the state, they go home on Thursday so they can be back in their districts and with their family. And unfortunately, I've seen where people come to the Capitol on Friday and they're looking around like, where's everyone at? And unfortunately, they don't get to talk to anyone because everyone has already gone home. So there's a couple of things you need to do. Make sure you know what the schedule is for the week, and then try to get on their calendar. Call their staffer, their assistant, schedule a meeting, and that will make sure that everyone is ready to accommodate your being there in person. But yeah, I would say definitely being able to visit in person, share your story, your unique lived experience definitely makes a difference. And another thing I always like is when we're having a bill that we hear from experts on, like a constituent or even people around the state. Maybe it's a healthcare bill, and we'll hear from a doctor, and they provide questions that if they were in my seat, they would be asking the bill's author. And it's pretty nice to be able to have that expert input and then ask those questions. And it's a win-win because it helps get deeper into the weeds on the bill, and then it also lets the person who's reaching out feel heard, not only from themselves but on behalf of their industry and profession.
That makes a ton of sense. Now, this next question we're going to get into more later, but just as your brief initial thoughts, a question we get all the time. Do you think it's worth calling or emailing your representative, even if you know it's not going to change their mind?
I definitely think it's important because, as I mentioned, if you go through the office route, every one of those calls and emails are logged. And the moment it reaches over 10, it's going to be flagged. And while you may not change the mind of someone who's, for example, really hardcore right wing, you do definitely have the chance to plant a seed, to let them know that they're not just going to steamroll their constituency, that they have people out there who are monitoring, who are acting as watchdogs, who are going to hold them accountable at their next town hall. So I know that it can feel like you're screaming into the void, but it does make a difference, and it ultimately will have a purpose if you're consistent enough in doing it.
All right, and we will come back to that in just a moment when we're looking at some emails that we are going to be analyzing and responding to. But I wanted to give you a chance. You mentioned earlier a method you developed that is for people trying to persuade their representatives. Do you want to explain what you've come up with?
Yeah, Annie Laurie had suggested that we talk about a framework to give people a blueprint for how to effectively lobby their lawmakers. And so, she had mentioned in the email that we need a way to help people go forward. And so I created this framework called Forward, and it breaks down to find lawmakers. First, find your lawmaker, and also find the lawmakers in which are going to be having input on the bill, such as committee chair people. Organize, and this means find allies, organize your messaging, write down your personal story. Reach out. Once you have your messaging, reach out to your elected official. Watchdog. Monitor, follow the votes, find out where their campaign contributions are coming from, adapt, be sure to have a backup plan. If things don't go exactly as you planned, then you have a plan B. Raise awareness. This is where social media can definitely make an impact and drive change. And if you look at the story I gave at the top of the hour about 9-year-old Kaylee, she followed this framework exactly. So she went to the county fair. She had a problem with Pets as Prizes, and so her mom helped her find her lawmaker. And then she organized a message. And then she reached out to me with that message, and then we monitored these committees. And on the third week, when we realized that the bill wasn't going to get a committee hearing, little Kaylee had to adapt. And so from adapting, we raised awareness by reaching out to local media, sharing her story, and then her story was viewed by local county officials, and she drove that change, and she continues driving change. And so you can apply this Forward method to just about anything, whether it's a personal interest or on behalf of your profession. Reaching out and lobbying your elected officials is extremely important, because we have another form of initiating change, and that's the ballot initiative. But we're seeing in states across the country, the ballot initiative is getting chipped away. There's one particular bill in Oklahoma called House Bill 1020 or Senate Bill 1027. If it's to pass and sign into law, I believe there will never be another citizen-led ballot initiative make it to the actual ballot, because it's so restrictive and designed to limit the people's constitutional right to protest their government. If that does happen, then the only thing that people have to then affect change, plus half the country who doesn't have the power of the citizen-led ballot initiative, is to become very effective citizen lobbyists. And I believe that the Forward method is a great blueprint for getting there.
Absolutely. And in states like Wisconsin, for instance, where I'm based, that's already where we are. We don't have the citizen ballot initiative option currently. We're trying to fix that, but as it is right now, it's all we have. So I absolutely love that. And by the way, Forward as the acronym that you've chosen is particularly appropriate for Wisconsin as the state motto. You could convince us that you were maybe from Wisconsin. And you mentioned earlier that if there are any FFRF chapter heads or chapter members listening, or if you're interested in forming an FFRF chapter, you can reach out to us. Mickey can dive more into this approach and how it works with chapters, a special presentation for them. Now, the main reason we wanted to do this show today is because we get lots of messages expressing doubt that contacting representatives is an effective way to make real change. So, Mickey, let's take a look at some emails that we've received from our Action Alert prompts to see if we can help people feel a bit more optimistic about the process. And then after that, We will show you how our action alert system makes it super easy to email or call your representatives about issues important to the FFRF Action Fund. So the first email we're going to look at says, "My senators are Democrats. There's no need for me to urge them. The problem is with the GOP senators who voted to confirm all incompetent people. There's no law to remove an incompetent president with a criminal record at that. Our laws are applicable only to good people and not for unscrupulous people who have populated the administration." So we're going to hear a bunch of partisan related concerns coming up, and this is a common thing going on. But Mickey, what were your thoughts when you read that email?
Well, I love these emails, and I continue to encourage people who are listening now to write in with your questions. These are all very valid. For those who have friendly lawmakers who you believe are representing your best interests, it's just as important to reach out to fortify their conviction, to know that, hey, I'm hearing from my constituents. They're liking what I'm saying. They're liking how I'm voting. That's going to give them more conviction to stand up and to continue fighting for you, and also to perhaps author some legislation that would and continue to strengthen the separation of church and state, that could repeal some old laws off the books. But the more they hear from you, they're going to really like it, because one thing that politicians are motivated by is public recognition, being some thank yous, so that can go a long way. And as far as your those who have elected officials who you feel are not voting in your best interest, it's extremely important to reach out, because as I mentioned earlier, all of those calls and emails and in-person visits are logged, and they do take note, even if they don't publicly acknowledge it. And there's a couple of ways in which you can go about getting their attention. I mentioned watchdogging, going to town halls, monitoring their vote, seeing where their campaign donations are coming from. And then, and I mentioned social media too. There's a particular person in Oklahoma who made an incredible difference from a very well-written post. It wasn't too long, but she got to the heart of the matter on Dusty Devers, who's a senator here in Oklahoma. His Senate Bill 1017 would have eliminated services for kids who are on an individualized education program, such as and who are receiving services such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy. In his bill, it said it wasn't the responsibility of the State Department of Education to give those services to public school children. And so she wrote an incredible post here, and she said, these services are not the responsibility. She basically outlined the bill, but here's the part that really had a big impact. She said, "As a speech language pathologist, I think it's very important to advocate for my clients and be a voice against this absolutely ridiculous bill that intends to take away from thousands of students with disabilities. If passed, it will become effective next school year." So she put that out there, and guess what? It got 9,500 shares in a couple of weeks, almost 2,000 likes, and the pressure was so much that Senator Devers actually ended up killing his own bill. And so there's a great example of citizen lobbying having a direct effect on getting rid of terrible legislation. Now, will that happen all the time? It won't, but more eyes that see it, the more people who are paying attention, who are putting public pressure on bad bills, it can definitely make a difference. And even if the senator or representative doesn't kill their own bill, you can bet they're going to be hearing an earful from constituents and people around the state.
Absolutely. So with the frustration that our advocate was feeling here, one thing they could do is they could take the talking points, and in addition, hopefully, to sending this email, they could put it on social media, use any channels you have to spread the message so that more eyes can see it and potentially create that blowback that you're describing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, let's take a look at email number 2. So here's another person who's frustrated. They say, "My right-wing reps don't give a shit. Waste of time." And I'll be honest, we get a lot of these. There are a lot of people who feel this way, and I completely understand it. There's going to be a mention later of my own U.S. senator, which I have a story from, so I'll save the story. But one other thing I'll mention is that you are also, when you send emails, and especially when you give phone calls to hostile offices that you know are not going to support the stance you're advocating for. The other thing you're doing is you are prohibiting them from saying honestly that they have a mandate and that they have not received any negative feedback. Now, if they're going to lie, they're going to lie, and you can call them out on it. But I've definitely heard representatives who will get up and say, I got 40 calls from constituents about this bill, and every single one was in favor of it. And if you are declining to send an email to that representative because well, they're the sponsor of this bill, I'm not going to change their mind about it, you've allowed them to honestly make that statement. And you don't want to make that mistake. Don't give them that impression where they're able to say everybody supports this bill.
That's exactly what, excuse me, it's exactly what I was going to say as well. If they do say that and you have actually sent an email in opposition, then you can call out the hypocrisy and post a copy of your email of when you sent it and show them to be, how could you say, untruthful. And so, as I mentioned, every one of those are logged, and you can't just let them get off the hook like that. And also, you may not have the right story. Now, this is more pertaining to state and local level, and it can work at the federal level as well, too. But you say it's not worth a shit because it's just not breaking through. Find something that personally affects the lawmaker. Maybe it's a family, a friend. I remember back in 2017, I was trying to legalize industrial, hemp in Oklahoma for CBD oil, textiles, that type of thing. It was very common commodity back in Oklahoma in 1937. It was outlawed, wanted to lift the ban. And the first year, it really got nowhere. And then I remember the next year, I overheard the then floor leader talking about their niece who was having seizures, and he had discovered CBD oil that could help her. And so I approached him with the bill that I had, and I said, hey, I'd love to go in on this with you. If we were growing that CBD, if they were growing the hemp in Oklahoma, that CBD oil could be derived right here locally. It would not only help your niece, but our local farmers as well. And he was personally affected, saw the value in it, and we ended up co-authoring that bill together. And then in 2018, for the first time since 1937, industrial hemp became legal in Oklahoma. It gave our farmers a new crop to plant, and it's been very profitable ever since. It even opened the door for medical marijuana. And so I would say that especially the GOP lawmakers, once they realize how an issue affects them or their family personally, they're much more open to hearing your ideas. And I've used that particular strategy numerous times to pass laws. That law is actually right there on the back from 2018.
Wow. That is a great success story and really good advice for, whenever we do our action alerts, you can always customize what you're writing. And so my inspiration from that story would be if you have any way to connect this to something you think your lawmaker may care about, then go in and you can just add that in, throw it right at the top and say, hey, here's why I think you in particular should care about this bill. So love that. Our next email is from someone who maybe thinks their representatives are not going to be so receptive to reason. So here's what they have to say. Guys, I appreciate what you do, but both of my senators are morons, just like Orange Jesus. So it would be beyond futile and a definite waste of time to try to communicate with them. So any more thoughts? We'll get to the other side of the frustration, but any more thoughts on when someone thinks their lawmakers are not only hostile, but also incompetent?
Hey, you may be surprised. If you don't try, you'll never know. There's a constituent who reached out to me. Their son was at a baseball practice and in high school, and unfortunately had a severe asthma attack, had no prior history of respiratory illness, but had a severe asthma attack and unfortunately later on died. And in honor of Brendan McLarty, his family wanted to create a nonprofit that would raise money and put inhalers, albuterol inhalers, in every school in Oklahoma. One problem is they needed a medical, they need medical assurance from the state. And so reached out to me. They told me their story. We wrote a bill that would allow them to raise money, put those inhalers in every school, and keep the school away from liability. And it passed. And this is a bill that heard from a lot of my colleagues across the aisle, a lot of constituents who's like, hey, this is a big problem, especially in windy states like Oklahoma. And there were lawmakers from the other side of the aisle who came up and who were, anti-vax, this and that, but completely for this particular bill. I would have never thought that they would be for allowing schools to just administer albuterol inhalers in the event of an emergency. And it passed. And it's been such a successful program that not only has a nonprofit been able to put these inhalers in every school in Oklahoma, but the state actually appropriated $200,000 to buy more inhalers to put them out there. And it's been used for the past 4 years, hundreds of times. So who knows how many lives it saved. But going back to the question, to the email, you just never know until you try. You've got to at least be proactive and give it a shot, because you can be very surprised in how someone may be personally invested or affected, and they're completely for your idea and bill. And if not, then at least you gave it a shot. And guess what? That email is logged, and it's gonna be on the tally card.
Absolutely. And that's something that I know I've learned too in my time in government advocacy, is that it's really easy to fall into kind of a point of apathy when we have our partisan divide. And like, our country is very divided right now, but when you get to know lawmakers and their staff, you find that it's not as stark and simple as it seems, especially when you're looking from a long ways away, when you're hearing, national news about federal trends. It's really easy to think that all the members of one party are all alike because they all vote alike. And it's just not that simple. So, and then the other side of the equation is, how much effort is it to click one button to send an email, right? We make it as easy as we possibly can. If nothing else, just take the time to click the button and send the email, and you never know, you might get surprised at some point.
Our action alerts are very effective. And for anyone who's not signed up, be sure to do that. We monitor hundreds of bills across the country. We'll give you an alert whenever there's a bad bill coming up. And of course, as you mentioned, Ryan, being able to include your personal story into that form letter is going to break through and definitely could likely make a difference.
Yep. And in a few minutes, we'll show a quick video that shows just how easy it is. Now, our next email is on the other side of the frustration. So this one says, please be advised, both my senators are strong Democrats. My representative is likewise a strong Democrat. Washington is considered the bluest state in the country. I do not need to take their time with pleas. They actually send me some of the things that they are doing to thwart this inane president. So this is, again, a federal action alert. We got a response from this person who's frustrated because their representatives are so good. They feel like, why am I wasting their limited resources to contact them? So what are your thoughts on that side? If there's someone who is frustrated that their reps are already doing the right thing, but they're not being effective?
Well, you're in a pretty good spot, but as you know, democracy requires participation. One of the states I have is Nevada. It's democratically controlled, a supermajority in the House and Senate. However, they do have a Republican governor, and that Republican governor is trying really hard to install a big-time private school voucher bill, and of course, it's getting dismantled over in the legislature. It's not even being heard, basically. But it's important in that case for people in Nevada who want to strengthen public education, who want to prevent the scam of siphoning off public dollars into private schools, to reach out to their lawmakers to say, hey, thank you for voting in our best interests. Continue up the good fight. Please protect and strengthen public education, public safety, whatever is on your mind. Be sure to enforce that, because if, for example, they never hear from you and a skillful politician convinces them somehow how school choice is good for everyone, they could be duped. I mean, legislators aren't experts in everything. Many of them are duped. And if they never hear from you, then they'll say, well, this maybe isn't an important issue because I never hear about it. And next thing you know, your state's trying to battle private school vouchers just like they did yesterday in Texas. So it requires active participation and letting those friendly lawmakers know how you feel, despite if everything's going your way currently, because it may not forever.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if when you're a lawmaker, you're balancing so many different topics. Every time you send an email about something that you care about as a constituent, you're bumping it up their list of priorities to say this is what people actually care about. So I think it's always worth doing it. Now, all right, next email. It says, sorry, FFRF, this is the old democracy way of working, not what is happening now. Get ready to really fight. So what about this? People who are apathetic about democracy itself, basically.
Well, democracy currently is in peril, and this person is right. And, it can seem like these efforts are not effective, but I promise you they do make a difference. They are working. I'm a big proponent of direct democracy, specifically ballot initiatives, giving ordinary people the ability to go out and affect and influence policy at the local level. One of the things about that is you have to collect signatures in person. It can't be online. And one of the good things about having to collect in person is it's breaking that digital divide that has polarized America. And so while I'm out collecting signatures to raise minimum wage in Oklahoma, we could start talking about public education. We could start talking about the housing crisis in Oklahoma. You never know where it can stem from. But having those one-on-one, old school, face-to-face phone calls or in-person visits is still very much effective, no matter how advanced technology gets. I understand at the federal level, our democracy, I would say right now, is in severe jeopardy. But what you can do at the state and local level is continue reaching out, having the phone call, having your stories, reaching out in person, because that will never go out of style. Just like stories have been around since the beginning of time, people still pay people to come speak in person. It's preferred over virtual. So that is one thing that's ingrained in human DNA is personal stories, face-to-face. Those things will never go out of style, especially for politicians who thrive in a lot of those type of environments.
Absolutely. And if you believe in democracy, don't give up on it, right? So you can be aware of all these threats that Mickey was just describing and fight to preserve democracy. But also, if you are the one who's saying, well, there's no point, then you're kind of making a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right.
And Ryan, to that point, yeah. I just read this, I was reading this book and I read this quote by Cicero that really stood out to me, and it's relevant to today's conversation. But Cicero said, freedom is participation in power. In other words, freedom isn't just about having rights, it's about actively shaping the decisions that affect your life. So freedom is participation in power. If you don't participate, you risk losing that freedom, you risk losing that power. So participation is vitally important to retain your rights and have a say in how your life is being governed by elected officials.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that kind of ancient wisdom, right? If you get too apathetic, too comfortable, or too cynical, then you're going to lose the things that you've taken for granted. All right, email, the next one is a funny one. It says, I appreciate and support FFRF's continuing efforts to thwart Trump's fascist administration, but my wife and I live in the middle of enemy territory here in Utah, and FFRF's urging to write or call political representatives to oppose anything Trump is the epitome of pissing into the wind. You can do it, but we'll wonder why you did. Any other suggestions that will actually help to ruin this man would be helpful. So this is clearly a passionate supporter who is feeling like, again, reaching out is not the most effective. So we've hit on this a lot, but any other thoughts that come to mind on this one, Mickey?
Yeah, I like that one. And if you aim in the right direction, it may have a positive effect if enough people join in the wind. But no, I would say it goes back to the whole theme of this. If you look at the forward framework, organize, reach out, monitor, be a watchdog, adapt, raise awareness, drive change. As Cicero said, if you don't participate, you can't expect to retain and keep those freedoms and rights. This is our democracy. It's for the people. And as citizen lobbyists, we're going to continue showing up, making our voices heard, no matter how tough it gets. But to that point, Self-care is very important. Even elected officials get burnt out. I mean, it's a lot. So make sure that you're restoring yourself, taking care of yourself so you can be there to show up and fight on behalf of yourself, your family, your loved ones, your profession, your industry. It really goes back to taking care of yourself. Recharge your batteries, but never give up.
Absolutely, and that is a good point to mention with all of this is, if you're just at a point where you need a break from being an advocate, like don't feel bad about that. Feel free to check out if that's what you need, because we need people to be in this for the long run. All right, next email. So I have a personal story with this one. This is coming from my home state of Wisconsin. So this person says, this is useless. Senator Ron Johnson won't change his mind because of anything I write him. You know that. And to their credit, I do know that. Ron Johnson and I disagree about just about everything. And I pretty much guarantee at this point, if I were to talk to him one-on-one about most of the things I care about, I'm not going to change his mind either. But something I learned when I was doing some lobbying in Washington, D.C., I met with Ron Johnson's office, and I met with one of his staffers. And Mickey mentioned earlier how staffers are the ones who usually get eyes on the communication we send. So when you send an email, when you call, you're usually not going to talk to the actual lawmaker. You're going to talk to a staffer. And in D.C., I met with a staffer who was this younger guy in his mid-20s. And also, presumably, when you're a staffer at a Republican office, you probably share that Republican's views. So that's what I knew going into the meeting. And it was one of these meetings where the person was being polite, but only kind of half listening. I think we were talking about federal vouchers. I'm not 100% sure, but at some point, I made some argument that caught his attention. And so I saw his eyes kind of look up from his paper, and he looked at me and he said, "Is that true?" And so I elaborated a little bit on whatever it was, and everything I say in these meetings, I check ahead of time, so I knew it was true. So I said, "Yeah, look it up. This is a really important thing." And you could tell he was genuinely surprised and interested. This is something he hadn't heard before. And so presumably he looked into it. Now, did that change Ron Johnson's mind about this particular issue? No, probably almost definitely not. But this staffer, who do you think staff legislative offices? I would say it's often going to be people who have political ambitions themselves, people who are interested in the political process. So this staffer I talked to, for all I know, could be a rising star in the Republican Party. And I've planted a seed, besides making a personal connection with them. I got them thinking about an issue that they had never thought about before. And so to me, if nothing else, this is worth your time, because you are getting FaceTime, even through an email, with a staffer. And in addition to them logging this interaction, saying, here's a constituent who disagrees with us on this issue, you might actually make a point that this staffer files away in their brain, where they say, I hadn't considered that particular perspective. So that's another reason to reach out, even if you know their boss is not going to actually change their vote.
Ryan, that's a perfect example. And I've been successful in getting some bills heard because I was able to appeal to the staffer. For example, some of my pet protection bills had one that would require a minimum or a maximum weight limit on a leash or a tether. And of course, the lawmaker didn't really care. But when the staffer, the assistant, heard about it, she's a huge pet rights activist, lobbyist, and citizen lobbyist. And it was important to her. So she was able to tell the lawmaker why it's such a great bill. And that's the only reason I was able to get a committee hearing for it. That was a few years ago. But it just emphasizes your point that if you're able to get through to the staffer, to the assistant, then you're about at least halfway there to getting through your idea to the elected official.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so thank you so much for reading through those emails with me, Mickey. Now, with those concerns out of the way, let's talk for a minute about the FFRF Action Fund Action Alert System. If you go to ffrfaction.org, you can see all the different action alerts that we've sent out across the country. You can visit that page to find an alert relevant to you, but an even easier way to stay informed is to visit our Action Center, where you can sign up to automatically get sent action alerts relevant to your area. Let's play a quick video we made that shows just how easy the Action Alert system is to use. If you pay attention to current events, you know you need to get more involved in your government. And I'm going to show you a tool that will make that easier than ever. Allow me to introduce you to the Action Center for the FFRF Action Fund. I highly recommend bookmarking this in your web browser, and you can find the Action Center on our website, ffrfaction.org under the drop-down menu, Take Action. On the left, you will see a list of our active campaigns that you can take action on. These are updated automatically, so you can always check in to see if there's anything new. On the right side of your screen, if you're not yet logged in, you'll be prompted to enter your name and address. This is so that our system knows which districts you live in, both state and federal, to ensure that your messages go to the right representatives. After you sign up through our Action Center, you'll automatically receive emails when a new campaign is released in your area. Once you're logged in, you'll see a list of all your representatives, ranging from your 2 US senators and governor down to your local officials. If any of these names are unfamiliar to you, I recommend taking a moment to educate yourself on who these people are and introducing yourself to them. They are your elected officials, and especially for state and local positions, they never hear from the vast majority of their constituents. To take action on one of our automated campaigns, click on the campaign on the left. If you're on our email list, you'll also get a direct link through your email. Then you can read through what this action alert is about and who we're asking you to contact. We'll suggest some talking points, which you can review on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a personal story or other additional points to make, we encourage you to edit your message. Then you simply click on Submit Selected Letters, and your emails will be automatically sent to your elected officials. After that, most of our campaigns will invite you to call the offices of your elected officials. The dialing is all automatic, and we once again provide you with suggested talking points. So even if you're not super familiar with the issue, it's very easy for you to push your elected officials in the right direction. And that's it. We've tried to design our Action Center to be as user-friendly as possible, so that if you want to put a lot of time into your actions, you can do so. But if you just want to send some quick emails and phone calls, it only takes 1 minute or less, because we've already written everything out for you. Thank you so much for your support and for being an advocate of the constitutional separation between state and church. All right, and so Mickey, to close out the show, we have a couple audience questions that I'd love to get your thoughts on. The first I've got for you is from Willie G, who asks, what if your lawmaker doesn't answer their phone and there's no space in their voicemail? Have you ever run into that, or what are your thoughts?
Well, that sounds like a very poorly managed office. Sorry that's happening to you. That shouldn't be the case, especially if you're calling the Capitol phone number. What I would do from there is reach out to the Capitol operator, let them know that the voicemail box is full and that you would like to leave a note with the elected official with a request for them to call you back, at least to their assistant to call them back. But for an elected official to have a full inbox to where they can't accept new voicemails is unacceptable, and I definitely raised some noise about it.
Awesome. That makes sense. Calling the Capitol operator. This is why we love having a sitting legislator on this show. That is something I would not have thought of. Thank you. And then one other question from Bill B asks, do you find that response to things like FFRF Action Fund's outreach and actions has diminished because of the frustration with MAGA's success, especially with young voters? And I can speak from experience looking at our data. The answer is no. So there certainly are ebbs and flows of how engaged people are. And I think part of that is because of the importance of self-care we were talking about earlier. A lot of people do need to just take a little bit of a break. So we'll get periods where some people are saying, I can't do this right now. But overall, right now, people are very fired up. People are generally very involved. We get plenty of these emails that are expressing frustration and apathy, as we've been discussing, but that's always been true. I've been here doing this work for about 10 years, and it's always been the case that people feel like, oh, there's no point in me reaching out. And again, we've always been trying to encourage them that it really is worth it, especially at the state and local level, but even at the federal level, and especially now that it's easier than ever. So I think there's always been that frustration, but I do not think there's been a significant uptick. If anything, I think people are more upset now than they have been in the past, and a lot of people want to know what they can do about it, which is heartening to see. All right. One last question that I'll give to you, Mickey. What can I do if I don't have a personal story about a bill? How best can we start to move legislators from one side to the other if it's about an issue on something like LGBTQ plus rights, for instance? If you don't have a personal story about the bill, where would you start?
Maybe if you have the opportunity, meet with the elected in person, talk to them, maybe, just try to say, hey, so you're always working, what do you like to do for fun? And, through that rapport, you may get to a point where someone that they are friends with or someone they know is, part of the LGBTQ plus community, and you can start to build some type of, personal connection for them there. Or if they're very religious, you could cite Jesus on how, love thy neighbor above all else. Let their God be the judge of it. But definitely reframing your message into some way that will connect with the legislator will get you pretty far. If you don't have a personal story, perhaps you could use your background as a professional and what you do, what you're an expert in, whether that be as a professional or something that you love to do as a hobby. Maybe that will lend you the credibility. I know that there's an architect who's a friend of mine in Oklahoma named Jesse Stringer, who has been my go-to when it comes to housing issues, how to create more space for housing, how to, why we need to eliminate minimum parking mandates, why we need to build more duplexes in communities that only allow single-family homes, why we need to have fair zoning acts in place. These are all things that I would have never known about if I hadn't had the expert testimony from someone like Jesse. In fact, she was able to advocate and lobby for herself and her industry by participating in one of my interim studies where she presented on innovative housing solutions such as 3D printing, and then also offered some really good solutions for modernizing zoning laws. And as a result, that turned into legislation. And here's a great example. All three of those bills that would have absolutely been a positive in addressing our housing crisis in Oklahoma, all three of them failed in committee. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, we have to adapt. We have to figure out how to get that message to those particular committee members so we can advance it next year. And Jessie had a great idea. She put her expert knowledge into an op-ed and she submitted it to the Tulsa World, and it got picked up. And she, much better than I was able to, explain why these laws are needed, why the housing crisis is only going to get worse, why institutional investors and hedge funds are buying up the housing market, and what that means for Oklahomans and the American dream. And she got it out there. So that particular op-ed being sent to the lawmakers who voted no could absolutely make a difference next year when we refile the bill and try again. And so it just is about compounding your citizen lobbying and taking care of yourself and continuing to move forward, knowing that eventually you are going to make a difference. And it may not be in the way you expected, like little Kaylee, but it may be on a smaller level that is then able to grow onto a much larger impact. So I'll leave everyone with that, and hopefully you have the encouragement to go forth and make a difference when it comes to lobbying your elected officials.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mickey. It is always a pleasure to have you on the show. And that will wrap up this week's episode of The Secular Advocate. If you want more information about the FFRF Action Fund, check out our website at ffrfaction.org. Please consider becoming an advocate yourself or making a donation to help us defend America's secular principles. And please like, subscribe, and share this channel with others. See you next time on The Secular Advocate.